All right, folks. I think it's morning. Yep, it's 11:30 when I'm doing this recording. So, going to this is section 3 and 4 of the it's part two, but sections 3 and 4 of the historical lessons for you. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint, give you a review, and then you guys will be in good shape for your quiz. Just a reminder, you have that worksheet that you have that needs to be filled out completely and turned in. Okay, if you only do part of it, then I'm going to take points away. And it's going to be based on how many questions you answer. So let's just say there's 20 questions on there. You answer 10, you get a 50. You answer 15, you get 75. You answer 5, you get 25 points. And it goes in as a test grade basically. So make sure that you take the time to fill this thing out and turn it in at the end of the week. All right, when it's due. I think these are due on Thursdays. So, but just look at Google Classroom. Information's in there, and your instructor will also be able to tell you that too. So, all right. So here we go. So for this, describe the role of communication and printing in the rapid dissemination of information, ushering the age of enlightenment. Okay, so dissemination is the act of spreading something, especially information, widely circulation, dissemination of public information. Just going to go back here for a second and check something. Yep. Okay. Enlightenment, it's basically a noun, and it's the action of enlightening or the state of being enlightened. The action or state of attaining or having attained spiritual knowledge or insight in particular in Buddhism, that awareness which frees a person from the cycle of rebirth. And then it was a European intellectual movement of the late 17th and 18th centuries, emphasizing reason and individualism rather than tradition. It was heavily influenced by the 17th century philosopher such as Descartes, Locke, and Newton, and its prominent exponents include Kant, Goethe, and Voltaire, Rousseau, and Adam Smith. All right, just to name a few. So the Enlightenment, also known as the Age of Enlightenment or Age of Reason, was an intellectual and philosophical movement that dominated the world of ideas in Europe during the 18th century, which is considered as the century of philosophy. The Enlightenment and scholastic development changed the psychopolitical and literary scenario of Europe, and its effects flourished during the French Revolution and afterwards. The period widely circulated their ideas through meetings, scientific academias, Masonic lodges, literary salons, coffee houses, and in printed books and pamphlets. So, do you remember what the significant change happened in the 1700s? It was in the first section you saw. So, do you remember what significantly change happened in the 1700s? So, I'll kick the tires on this, see if you can come up with an answer. You know, what happened? What do you remember? So, you can pause this for a second and let's discuss. 18th century, in 1710, German painter and engraver Jacob Christoph Leblond produces the first engraving in several colors. He uses the mezzotint method to engrave 3 metal plates. Each plate is inked with a different color, using red, blue, yellow. Later on, he adds a 4th plate bearing black lines. This technique helped form the foundation for modern color printing. Leblond's work is based on Newton's theory, published in 1702, which states that all colors in the spectrum are composed of 3 primary colors: blue, yellow, red. Remember that Gutenberg's press has been around for almost 300 years at this point. Primary printing was only done in one color, black. William Carlson is an English typographer whose foundry operates in London for 200 years. His Carlson Roman Old Face is cut between 1716 and 1728. The letters are modeled on Dutch types, but they are more delicate and not as monotonous. Monotonous. Carlson's typeface remains popular Digital versions are still available today. I think we have it in our library. Oh, wrong button. Sorry. So, what's a book? Can you guys take a few minutes here and talk about what a book is? So, just maybe describe it, maybe how is it bound, stuff like that. So, let's take a minute here. A book is both a usually portable physical object and the body of immaterial representations or intellectual object whose material signs, written or drawn lines, or other two-dimensional media the physical object contains or houses. As a physical object, a book is a stack of usually rectangular pages made of papyrus, parchment, vellum, paper. Those are different types of paper. Papyrus being probably like the first, and with the parchment, then vellums, and then paper as you know it today. The others are still made, by the way. Oriented with one side, either left or right, depending on the direction in which one reads the script. Tied, sewn, or otherwise fixed together and then bound to the flexible spine of a protective cover of heavier, relatively inflexible material, so that when the open front cover has received a massy enough stack of sheets, the book can lie flat. The technical term for this physical arrangement is codex, in the plural codices. In the history of handheld physical support extended with written compositions or records, the codex replaces its this is in the way here. Its predecessor, the scroll. Now, I'm just going to go back up here to the part where it talks about a book can be bound on the left or the right. And it says, depending on the direction which one reads. Well, in the United States, I'm pretty much in the Western world, when you read English, obviously, in most languages, you're reading from left to right. So the binding would be on the left. But I think it's Hebrew, if I'm not mistaken. Hebrew reads right to left. So the binding would be on the right side because it reads the opposite way. So just if you're wondering why it says it that way. So we know what a book is now. So what's a pamphlet? Again, let's kick this around the classroom. Let's talk about it. Let's see what you guys come up with for answers. So we can pause here for a second or two, or a minute or two. All right. A pamphlet is an unbound book that is without a hardcover or binding. It may consist of a single sheet of paper that is printed on both sides and folded in half, in thirds, or in fourths, called a leaflet. It may consist of a few pages that are folded in half and stapled at a crease to make a simple book. For the international standardization of statistics relating to book production and periodicals, UNESCO defines a pamphlet as a non-periodical printed publication of at least 5 but not more than 48 pages, exclusive of the cover published in a particular country and made available to the public, and a book as a non-periodical printed publication of at least 49 pages, exclusively of the cover pages. The UNESCO definitions are, however, only meant to be used as a particular purpose of drawing up their book production. So I know it says here that a pamphlet could be up to 48 pages, but typically what you're going to see in industry is a pamphlet will be typically under 12 pages. Because at some point, like 16, 24, 32, now those kind of fall into a book publication type thing. So when you stop and kind of think about all of this stuff, it's the most important thing is that there is some flexibility in some of these numbers that you're reading here. A pamphlet for sure will not have a different cover weight. The paper will all be the same. It says that it can be bound or not. That just means you could have 4 pages, 8 pages folded together, and there'd be no staple or anything like that. Again, they could be bound as well, but page counts typically are pretty small. The book industry, okay? The increased consumption of reading materials of all sorts was one of the key features of the social enlightenment. Developments in the Industrial Revolution allowed consumer goods to be produced in greater quantities at lower prices, encouraging the spread of books, pamphlets, newspapers, and journals. Media of the transmission of ideas and attitudes. Commercial development likewise increased the demand for information, along with the rising populations and increased urbanization. However, demand for reading material extended outside the realm of the commercial and outside the realm of the upper and middle classes, as evidenced by the Biblique Bleu. Literacy rates are difficult to gauge, but in France, the rates doubled over the course of the 18th century, reflecting a decreasing influence of religion. The number of books about science and art published in Paris doubled from 1720 to 1780, while the number of books about religion dropped to just 1/10 of the total. So, as printing processes became more productive, faster, book publication started to change, right? Because originally, we've got to remember, as we talked about before, primarily books were not owned by people individually. The books were, the church, the Bible. That was like the rule, right? Those are the folks that's where a lot of stuff was being fed out there and educating the people. So, reading underwent serious changes in the 18th century. In particular, Rolf Engelsling has argued for the existence of a reading revolution. Till 1750, reading was done intensively. People tended to own a small number of books and read them repeatedly. So you might have 12, 14 books, you'd read them over and over and over again, often to a small audience of people. After 1750, people began to read extensively, finding as many books as they could, increasingly reading them alone. This is supported by the increasing literacy rates, particularly among women. All right, section 4. Describe the role of movable type in increasing the pace of the spread of knowledge. Precursors to movable type. So this is stuff that they used in the printing industry before we got into movable type. So you have letter punches and coins, seals and stamps, and wood block printing. All right, so the wood block printing is this one down here on the right. Seals and stamps up here, and seals right here, stamps right there, and then letter punch and coins. All right. Letter punch and coins, part 2, are continued. Cylinder seals were used by the Mesopotamian to create an impression on a surface by rolling the seal on wet clay. They used it to sign documents as a mark objects of the owner's property. Cylinder seals were a related form of early typography capable of printing small page designs in relief on wax or clay. A miniature forerunner of rotogravure printing. And a modern rotogravure printing, just so you know, is a metal engraving. And money is printed via rotogravure, or now I think a lot of people shorten and call it gravure. There are other manufacturing processes. Some soda cans are done that way, but typically really large volumes of printing use rotogravure these days. Used by the wealthy individuals to seal and certify documents. By 650 BC, the ancient Greeks were using larger diameter punches to imprint small page images onto coins and tokens. Seals and stamps may have been precursors to movable type. The uneven spacing of the impressions on brick stamps found in the Mesopotamian cities of Urk and Lhasa, dating from the second millennium BC, have been conjectured by some archaeologists as evidence that the stamps were made by using movable type. Woodblock printing, following the invention of paper in the 2nd century AD during the Chinese Han Dynasty, writing materials became more portable and economical than the bones, shells, bamboo, slips, metal, or stone tablets, silk, etc. previously used. Yet copying books by hand were still labor consuming. Not until the Xpeng era, 172-178 AD, towards the end of the Eastern Han Dynasty, did sealing print and monotype appear. It was soon used for printing designs on fabric and later printing textbooks. So movable type in British English is the system and technology of printing and typography that uses movable components to reduce elements of a document, usually individual alphanumeric characters or punctuation marks, usually on the medium of paper. The components that make up movable type is you got A up there at the top, that's called the face. B is the body or shank. C is the point size. Number one is called the neck. One is called the shoulder. 2 is called the neck. 3 is the groove, and 4 is the foot. The world's first movable type printing press technology for printing paper books was made of porcelain materials and were invented around AD 1040 in China during the Northern Song Dynasty by the inventor Bang Shi. Subsequently, in 1377, the world's oldest extant movable metal print book, Jikji, was printed in Korea during the Goryeo Dynasty. Because of this, the diffusion of both movable type systems was, to some degree, limited to primarily East Asia, although various sporadic reports of movable type technology were brought back to Europe by Christian missionaries, traders, and business people who were returning to Europe after having worked in China and for several years, and influenced the development of printing technologies in Europe. Some of these medieval European accounts are still preserved in the Library of Archives of the Vatican and Oxford University, among others. Around 1450, Johannes Gutenberg introduced the metal movable type printing press in Europe, along with innovations in casting and type based on a matrix and hand mold. The small number of alphabetic characters needed for European languages was an important factor. Gutenberg was the first to create his typepieces from an alloy of lead, tin, and antimony, and these materials remain standard for 550 years. If you ever want to see one of these Gutenberg presses, there's a museum, Gutenberg Library in New York City, that actually has one of these printing presses. I think that's the closest one to us. I could be wrong. If you ever have the chance to go to the Boston Public Library, I was in there about a year or so ago, just kind of walking around, checking things out, and you'd be surprised how much antique printing devices they actually have in that library, just on display. Pretty cool. And then, of course, you got the printing museum that we all went to up in Haverhill this year. Ceramic movable type. Wensheng was a Chinese artisan and inventor of the world's first movable type technology. Developed the first movable type system for printing in China around 1040 AD during the Northern Song Dynasty, using ceramic materials, as described by the Chinese scholar Shen Ku. Just a picture of his shop there. Wood movable type. Wang Sheng also pioneered the use of wood movable type around 1040 AD, as described by the Chinese scholar Shen Ku. However, this technology was abandoned in favor of clay movable type due to the presence of the wood grains and the unevenness of the wood type after being soaked in ink. If anybody knows anything about wood, when it gets wet, it tends to expand and it can break down because it's how they make paper, right? So if you're inking this stuff up, eventually the moisture is going to get to the image area that you're trying to print, and it will distort and eventually not work. Whereas ceramic, where it's a hardened surface, it's going to last much longer and probably give you a better printing effect at the time. Metal movable type in China. At least 13 material finds in China indicate the invention of bronze movable type printing in China would happen no later than the 12th century, with the country producing large-scale bronze plate printed paper money and formal official documents issued by the Jin and Southern Song dynasties, with embedded bronze metal type for anti-counterfeiting markers, such as paper money printing, might be date back to the 11th century. The typical example of this kind of bronze movable type embedded copper block printing is printed a check of the Jin dynasty with 2 square holes for embedding 2 bronze movable type characters, each selected from 1,000 different characters, such as each printed on paper, and it has different combinations as a marker, or as we would know, a modern day serial number that would be on like money. A copper block printed note dated between 1215 and 1216 in the collection of Lu Xun's pictorial paper money of the Fourth Dynasty. 1914 shows 2 special characters, one called Zilio and Zihao, for the purpose of preventing counterfeiting. Metal movable type in Korea in 1234. The first books known to have been printed in metallic type set were published in the Goryeo Dynasty, Korea. They form a set of ritual books. While these books have not survived, the oldest in the world printed in metallic movable type is Jiki, printed in Korea in 1377. The Asian Reading Room of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. displays examples of this metal type, commenting on the invention of metallic types by Koreans. French scholar Henry Jean Martin described this as extremely similar to Gutenberg. Johannes Gutenberg of Mainz, Germany, is acknowledged as the first to invent metal movable type printing systems in Europe for the printing press. Before I go any further, I don't know if I mentioned this, but in this PowerPoint, the blue areas, I believe, these are live links. If you clicked on these, they should bring you to more information if you're ever interested in going back and reading up on more of this stuff. Gutenberg, a goldsmith familiar with techniques of cutting punches for making coins from molds, between 1436 and 1450, he developed hardware techniques for casting letters from matrices using a device called a hand mold. Gutenberg's key invention and contribution to movable type printing in Europe, the hand mold was the first practical means of making cheap copies of letter punches in the vast quantities needed to print complex books, making the movable type printing process a viable enterprise. Before Gutenberg, books were copied out by hand on scrolls of paper or printed from hand-carved wooden blocks. It was extremely time-consuming. Even a small book could take months to complete. And because the carved letters or blocks were flimsy, the wood's susceptibility to ink in the blocks had a limited lifespan. Type founding. So this is basically how they make the type. Type founding has, as practiced in Europe and the West, consists of 3 stages. Punch cutting, if the glyph design includes enclosed spaces, then a counterpunch is made. The counterpunch shapes are transferred to a relief, a cameo, onto the end of a rectangle bar of mild steel using specialized engraving tool called a graver. The finished counterpunch is hardened by heating and quenching, which is called tempering, or exposure to a cyanide solution for case hardening. Punch cutting continued. The counterpunch is then struck against the end of a similar rectangular steel bar. The letter punch to impress the sorry about that recessed spaces. It's called intagular. That's a form of intagular printing, by the way. The outer profile of the glyph is completed by scraping away with the graver the material on the outside of the counter space, leaving only the stroke or lines of the glyph. Progress towards the finished design is checked by successive smoke proofs. Temporary prints are made on a thin coating of carbon deposited on the punch surfaces by a candle flame. The finished letter punch is finally hardened to withstand the rigors of reproduction by striking. One counterpunch and one letter punch are produced for every letter or glyph, making up a complete font. The matrix is used to strike a blank die of soft metal to make a negative letter mold called the matrix. Casting. The matrix is inserted to the bottom of a device called a hand mold. This is where they're actually making the type now. Okay. The mold is clamped shut, and the molten type alloy, consisting mostly of lead and tin with a small amount of autonomy for hardening, is poured into the cavity from the top. Autonomy has the rare property of expanding as it cools, giving the casting sharp edges. When the type metal has sufficiently cooled, the mold is unlocked and the rectangular block, approximately 4 centimeters long, called a sort, is extracted. Excess casting on the end of the sort, called tang, is later removed to make the sort the precise height required for printing, known as type height. So what you see here is an example of a matrix. So the bronze part, or the bronze metal pieces with the letters or numbers in it, or the glyphs, you can see that that would be the bottom part of the hand mold. Then what they would do is they'd pour the metal into that hand mold, and if you look in that second row, the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth one over, you can see there's a piece of type, a piece of lead type, basically, that's still sitting in the mold. So it goes into there, then it gets extracted. When it comes out, then it looks like all those other pieces on that bottom row. And again, all this type is now reversed. Okay, so it's right reading in the matrix. Then you make the type itself. When you take it out, the type is now wrong reading, because again, when you're going directly to print on the paper surface, now you'll be back to right reading. And we'll talk about this a little bit here and coming up. This is a little bit of a more modern day version. When I went to Greater Lowell, which is many moons ago, they had this type of matrices in the school. So we set lines of type with this, and you would put it in a composing stick like so. So you can see it says Melissa. I think it says Melissa Kahn right there. So you would set this up in a composing stick. You'd be able to read it, and then what you would do is you would stick it in this Ludlow machine. And I don't know if you could see my mouse, but right here there's a slot right there, and you would take that matrix and you would slide it in that slot. You would then pull this handle down to lock it in place, and then there's a lever right here above the start and stop button. There's a lever right here. You can see it's kind of worn out. You lift that lever up, and what it did is there's a metal pot back here. That's a temperature gauge back here. There's a metal pot with lead in it. And what it would shoot up the lead up inside this chase area, they called it. And once it injected the lead, it would cool, and then the line of type right here would fall out of the machine. All right. So this is kind of how they created lines of type, and you didn't have to individually set type. You set it in the composing stick, created lines that could be reused. So if you had standing headlines, standing jobs, you would use this type of equipment. Now you're not having to hand set everything over and over and over again. So this is what that looks like. All right. It's called a slug. That's the nickname for it. So again, when you look at the top, right, it has the what if you're looking down on it, that's what it would look like, and then the side view is the actual line, what we call a line of type. Now, this had a standard height and a standard thickness, depending on the size type. So the thickness was based off your point size, but the height, regardless of the width or the point size, the height of these were always the same. All right, always the same. In typesetting, Ottmar Mergenthaler, 1886 invention of the linotype composing machine, is a major step forward. With this typesetter, an operator can enter text using a 90-character keyboard. Linotype equipment was used in production until the late 1970s. And here's an example of the machine. And if you remember at the Printing Museum, I think Frank had 2 of these. And when I went to Greater Lowell Tech, we actually had one of these in the theory classroom. So pretty cool to look at. There are people out there that still use them today, more of a historical type, but there are people that do letterpress printing still, so they're still doing this. Now, part of your test, you're going to have to know the each one of these things here. So if we start down here at the bottom, you've got the keyboard, right, which is where the operator sits and types everything. Then you have the vise, that's where the type will be slid into, be held in place. There's a mold disc just above it. The mold disc kind of comes up with the assembler. That's where it gets injected with, it will get injected in that area. The space box right here is if you needed to put space in between each line of type, then this is where you would do it, in between letters and stuff, not the lines. The magazine right here, this holds all the different type styles, characters, everything that this font family has. The distributor right here works with the elevator. So what happens is operator types the type down here, it gets sent over to here, it gets compressed, it makes a line of type, the lead line then comes out here. You can see some on the tray right here. All the type that's left over right here gets picked up by the elevator right here. The elevator picks it up, brings it back over to this channel, and each type character has a specific design or slot in it. And what happens is the distributor pulls those, so they come over here, it comes down, and the distributor grabs it. And as it's rotating through here, when it hits the correct nick or notch for that particular font, it will slide back down into the channel it belongs in. So it's a quick, easy way for everything to be put back where it belongs, not like the old style stuff. All right? So that's kind of how a linotype machine works. And this is much faster, obviously, than hand setting. This room here, this linotype room is probably at a newspaper. These men would sit there all day and set lines of type. The lines would be set up in trays and move to the layout room where they would be placed on the page of the paper. As you can see, the working conditions aren't the greatest. Also, notice it's all men. And the other thing, too, there's a video, hopefully it'll play for you guys at the end of this, but the video will bring this part up. But oftentimes they would hire people that were deaf to work in these rooms because, number one, they were probably on the loud side. Number two, if they were deaf, they couldn't really hear much or hear each other, hence they wouldn't talk to each other, so they would just type. So here's an example of a linotype machine. Again, we've seen these at the Museum of Printing in Haverhill. So I don't know if this video is going to play. No, it didn't. Oh, wow, sorry about my alarm. That video didn't play. That's weird. Yeah, this is a video and it's not playing. That's too bad. All right, well, that's the end of this section. If I can find the video, I will link this in the classroom for you so we can get it to play. But again, you should have been filling out your worksheet. If you didn't fill out the worksheet, then at the very least, you should get it filled out, get it submitted so you get credit for it. That's your study guide for the quiz, which is multiple choice, just like the last time. All right, that's it, folks. Have a good day and good luck on your exam.